Good day, and welcome to Hiroshima University's English Podcast.
Hi everyone, I'm Kay.
And I'm Joe.
Welcome back for part 2, the exciting conclusion to our podcast drama entitled
The Telltale Heart.
Everybody, the title of the story is very interesting. The Telltale Heart. What do you think it means?
Yes, everyone, try to guess. The Telltale Heart. Do you got it?
By the end of the podcast today, you will know.
As we explained last time, the story was written by the famous American writer Edgar Allan Poe.
Joe, besides The Telltale Heart, what other writings is Poe famous for?
Well, let me tell you about two of them, Kay, which I read back in junior high school. They're quite easy to read. The first one is called The Raven.
In Japanese, 大ガラス.
It's a poem about 2 pages long.
Oh, only 2 pages. Very easy.
And it was written in a musical style, in a supernatural atmosphere.
So, kind of like a ghostly atmosphere? Sounds scary.
It is. The man is alone in his house on a dark night in December. He is very sad because of the death of Lenore, his lover.
Oh, very sad.
Suddenly, there is a tapping.
Tap, tap, tap.
He finds nothing, and then the tap continues, but a little louder.
Tap, tap, tap.
When he opens the window, a raven flies into the room, and the raven can talk.
It can talk?
The raven can talk. But when the man asks it questions, it says only one word, nevermore.
Nevermore? What does that mean?
He asks the raven what its name is, and the raven answers,
Nevermore.
He asks the raven if he will ever meet his lover who died. The raven answers,
Nevermore.
He asks the raven if he will meet his lover, Lenore, in heaven. And the raven answers,
Nevermore. Joe, sounds scary.
It is. And it's not a happy ending, Kay.
Oh dear.
One more interesting, easy poem by Poe is called The Bells.
鐘.
It was published after his death, and it is only about 3 pages long.
Oh, another short one.
The Bells is interesting, Kay, because it has a lot of words which sound like other things, such as emotions.
擬声語。擬音語や擬態語の総称のことですね。
Yeah, the words imitate other sounds. The poem begins very happily with the jingling and tingling of the bells.
リンリンとかシャンシャンっていう音ですね。
And the poem becomes darker and darker until at the end of the poem it's the moaning and groaning of the bells.
ビュービューとかミシミシという音に変わっていきます。
So everyone, you can hear from the jingling and tingling of the bells to the moaning and groaning of the bells.
I see.
There are various ways to interpret the poem.
解釈。
For example, it starts in the happiness of youth and ends in the pain of old age. And it also talks about the terrible loss of a wife in a fire as the husband watches from outside.
Oh dear.
So, besides the telltale heart, everyone try to study the raven and the bells. If you do, and talk about the writings in English with a friend, your English ability will improve.
Joe, before we listen to the final part of The Telltale Heart, I have one more big question. Could you tell us about a couple of tourist spots associated with Poe where tourists can go today?
Sure, Kay. One is called the Edgar Allan Poe Museum, and it's in Virginia.
That's near Washington, D.C.
Yes, the Edgar Allan Poe Museum is in a cute old American house, and it has a lot of Poe's things from when he lived with his foster family, the Allens.
I see.
And another interesting place is the Edgar Allan Poe National Historic Site up in Philadelphia. This is also a beautiful old building, and Poe actually lived there for a short time.
I see.
There are several other places associated with Poe on the American East Coast, in New York, Boston, and Baltimore.
So, Joe, it's time for the second and final part of our story, The Telltale Heart.
Yes, as you remember, in part 1, a man is telling about how he killed an old man. And he did it in a very clever way.
Yes, the murderer says he's not crazy.
Here in part 2, we hear how he actually commits the murder.
But can he escape from the police?
Everyone, think about the title, The Telltale Heart. Can he escape from the police?
Let's listen.
Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, Part 2. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder, every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror, yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I had dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. Then I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eyes would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them, at length, to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chattered with familiar things. But, ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice. Yet, the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no! They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This, I thought, and this, I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of the hideous heart.
Yay, the police got him.
Yeah, he carefully planned everything, but in the end, he felt really guilty.
気が咎めていました。
Yes, he felt guilty, and the feeling showed itself in the sound.
幻覚かもしれないけど。
The guilty feeling showed itself in the beating of the old man's heart, which was still under the floor. The telltale heart. So, the heart told the story of the man's murder.
That's right. Well, everyone, we hope you liked Hiroshima University's podcast edition of The Telltale Heart.
Yes, don't forget to check out the vocabulary list for the story.
If you speak the words with a friend, your English will become great.
And we'll see you next time at Hiroshima University's English Podcast.
Take care.